So, hello again, everyone. I'm Cyndy, as before, and we're holding a panel discussion about effective code of conducts. As you all agreed to attend, you all agreed to LLVMs to be able to attend today. You may already be familiar with what a code of conduct is. But there's a significant amount of nuance and difficulties when it comes to designing and enforcing one that represents the community well. So today I'm joined here with some volunteers and some experts that I'll let them introduce themselves, and then we'll dive right into these questions. And so first, Kit.
Okay, hello, I'm Kit Barton. I work at IBM. I'm on the LLVM Foundation Board of Directors. I've been a member of the board since 2020, and I have also been serving on the LLVM Code of Conduct Committee also since 2020. And so I'm here to share my experiences. I fall into the volunteer category, not into the expert category. Yeah. So I'm here to share some of my experiences.
Hi, I'm Mike Edwards. I'm also on the LLVM Foundation. I'm also one of the founding members, I guess, of the LLVM's Code of Conduct Committee. I too fall into the volunteer category. I know just about this much when it comes to code of conducts and how to administrate them and how to help them be effective in a community. And so I'm actually really excited for this panel today to get some more insight into what other groups and other people go through and how they have helped make their code of conducts effective in the communities that they're a part of.
Great, thank you. Now on to our Zoom panelists. Guy first.
Hello, my name is Guy Davidson. I'm the head of engineering practice at Creative Assembly, which is the UK's oldest and largest game development studio. I've been using C++ since the late 80s. I have a fair amount of code of conduct team experience. At the moment, I'm leading 5 code of conduct teams for C++.
Wow.
And I'm delighted to be here. I'm also a co-founder of Hash Include, where we discuss a lot of things related to codes of conduct, and also we try and make C++ a nicer and more welcoming community.
Thank you. Next, Kate.
Hi, I'm Kate Gregory. I teach people C++, sometimes in person, a lot online, occasionally write books. I'm also one of the co-founders of Include C++, and I'm one of the leads on the Carbon language project. And Carbon's quite new, and at the moment the Code of Conduct team for Carbon is the lead, so I'm on that Code of Conduct team. I've also helped out at some conferences over the years.
Thank you, Kate. And then Sage.
Hi, I'm Sage Sharp. I use they, them pronouns. I run Otter Tech, which I do code of conduct enforcement training, and I've trained many different communities from different open source organizations, from the Python Software Foundation, Elastic, also OpenStreetMap, a bunch of other orgs. And I am happy, in the spirit of open source, to be able to be here and share some of our knowledge, because open source is all about sharing. And I really want to have a good discussion about code of conducts.
I can't agree more. We're really excited to learn. And I think the reason why we created this panel is because we have been working on, the LLVM has been working on a code of conduct, and we've kind of realized how difficult it is, and we thought that we could really learn from other communities dealing with similar problems. And so I guess to start off, what is the goal of code of conduct for its community, and how do things like transparency reports play in that goal? Kate.
This is a conversation that I've had because I've watched codes of conduct change. When they first happened, many of them, their audience was the potential harasser. The code of conduct said things like, don't harass people. And I found that a better code of conduct says, we won't let anyone harass you. So it's a different audience. And it's about reassuring people that they can feel comfortable coming, in many cases coming alone, to a conference a long way from home. And so you write your code of conduct completely differently when that's your goal. And you mentioned transparency reports, and having transparency reports that said something medium bad or a little bad happened, and here's how we handled it, is part of that same narrative of, we won't let people hurt you.
Sage?
The other thing I've seen a shift, to echo Kate, is I've seen a shift in how communities write their code of conducts. A lot of communities get into, what they think, we'll put up a code of conduct, it will stop the harassers. And what they find is that sometimes it is hard to define how do we deal with a report? How do we decide what consequences to apply? And so I've seen a shift in how code of conduct committees have started to really batten down, and in their code of conduct itself start to document, here's how we decide our consequences, here's how we vote on to decide what happens to people, here's the steps for how we communicate with the person who reported it, how we communicate with the reported person. And so I've really seen communities, once they get up a code of conduct, suddenly think, we need to figure out how the procedures, how do we handle reports. And so code of conduct has essentially three audiences: the person who may be reported, the person who may be involved in the incident, and then also the code of conduct committee itself.
So I'm going to try to respond. So I agree, and I think my experience of being on the committee is that I think a lot of times when there's an incident reported, the reporter doesn't necessarily understand or appreciate the impacts of the incident on other people, and this is kind of going into the transparency. This is where I think the transparency reports are very important, because we have a lot to learn, I think, as a community, the impacts of what we say, whether it's verbal or written. And I think a lot of that can be learned throughout the transparency reports and through sharing some of the incidents, not so much the outcomes, but the incidents themselves, so people can really appreciate the impacts that the incidents have on others.
Yeah. Can I just add something in there real quick? I think that when you're asking the question about why is a code of conduct important, right? And for the LLVM community in particular, I think we just saw a great demonstration of it, which is there was a common thread in the last talk about how trying to get started as a newcomer in a new organization, when there's a lot of people who may already know one another, may already be friends with one another, it can be really intimidating to try and break into a community that way. And so one of the things that we hope that the code of conduct helps facilitate is sort of providing that extra layer of comfort to know that we are going to do everything we can to create a safe space for you to come and be a newcomer, and to come and ask those new questions, and to meet new people and make new friendships, and sort of build those relationships that help strengthen you to be able to be successful moving forward. And I think a code of conduct is really important to help facilitate that.
So along the same lines, talking about reporting.
There was a guy.
Sage. Oh no, Guy.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Don't worry, there are five of us, so I'm not going to expect that we all get to take an answer to the question. But I think the important thing for me that the code of conduct brings to a community is an objective frame of reference. It's something that's written down and that you can't disagree with. When you sign up to a code of conduct, there's no sort of argy-bargy. There's no arguing about what is and isn't allowed. It's there in a well-written code of conduct, and that means that it offers a shortcut to resolving bad behaviour, and that shortcut also acts as encouragement to people who do want to join the community. It's great hearing all the answers you're giving. I think they're all bang on, and one of the things I'm enjoying about the code of conduct discussion is that we do all seem to be converging nicely.
Thank you, Guy. Yeah, and I think that's a really important point, because that's why when you sign up for this conference, you have to actively read and agree to the code of conduct, that you are aware that it exists. And that's been I feel like it's been a big shift in the tech community and conference space. It's almost shocking if I try to apply to a conference and don't see a code of conduct. And along the same lines, How do we navigate situations where community members feel singled out because they were asked to change their behavior? And how does a code of conduct committee support improvement and growth while being kind and like understanding to both someone who may violated the code of conduct and the person and like the community as a whole who, you know, is on the other side? Guy?
Yeah, this is an excellent question. And this is the one that always accompanies any discussions of code of conduct from people who are new to them. There is a grave danger with the code of conduct in turning the code of conduct committee into the police or jury or a judge or of overextending the role. And while good behavior does have to be enforced and disciplined, a code of conduct is a learning experience for a lot of people. And infractions are often a learning experience for the person who has committed the infraction. Many times, well, I say many times, probably only a couple of dozen referrals have been made to me over the past few years. And in almost all cases, it was purely out of ignorance. And so I think you do need to approach people who commit infractions with generosity and love and compassion and give them the opportunity to just sit with the moment and to learn that there is a different expectation of conduct from people.
Sage?
I think when someone is told, you know, hey, you did this particular behavior and it had this negative impact. That's one of the things that I teach in my workshop is when you're talking to someone, separating out their behavior and talking about it in a very neutral tone and what the impact of that behavior is. It can be uncomfortable. It's going to take them a moment. They might feel defensive. But I think there are a couple techniques that you can use in that conversation to help. One of them is to use teaming language. So instead of saying, you did this, or, the community needs you to change, it's more of a callback to shared values in your communities. You know, we as a community, I know that you value collaboration, sharing, and in order for you for our community to be more inclusive and welcoming, we need you to work on this particular behavior. So using teaming language can help. Also offering chances to practice new skills. A lot of the times it's language we need to change or it's behavior we need to change. It's going to take some time for people to change. And so sometimes offering a private space to have people learn new language or practice new language can help. And also, if you see people that are, sometimes, especially if someone is trying to change, that behavior may come back. And sometimes it takes gentle private reminders to be able to get someone to change. Now, all of that can sometimes feel like you're being singled out. But there's a way to do that and to frame it as this is calling to all our community's shared values and encourage the person to see it as a learning and growth moment versus a punitive moment, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you please use the mic just so they can hear?
It's on. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm a newbie to a code of conduct, discussion. So it feels a little abstract. So, like what is a code of conduct infraction? I mean, there are rare cases that, one sees, but then I'm sure there are more common cases too that people are talking about. So some examples, of what these could be would be helpful.
Kate?
So on include, one of the things in our code of conduct is you don't misgender people, either knowingly or accidentally. And a very common thing, especially for people for whom English is not a first language, is that even though we have pronoun markers on everybody's name, and that's how we're communicating, people will sometimes use the wrong pronoun. And usually it's simply a matter of reminding them what pronouns that person uses, and that's the end of it. Every once in a while, there's someone who does not take that well. And I would say there's probably 100, don't call that person he, call that person their real pronoun. And 1 out of 100, that won't go well. The rest of the time, 5 minutes later, nobody remembers it because it was nice and smooth.
Guy?
Sorry about that. Following on from Kate's point, and I'm sure she knows exactly what I'm going to say, is the use of the word guys. I have, a quite unique relationship with that name and with that word. But telling people that guys is an othering word can be quite hard. It takes real cognitive kind of strength to observe the dissonance of saying guys when you're confronted by a mixed group of people. I have on a couple of occasions had to remark to very senior members of the C++ community that they're using the word guys in their presentations. And that can be, it can be a hard thing to do, but it does need to happen. We do need to spot within our language where we are inadvertently dividing or excluding people.
Sage?
So in general, what I've seen in a lot of code of conducts is so the question that I heard was, can you give some examples of code of conduct things to make it more concrete? And so in a lot of code of conducts, there's 2 sections. One is, here's our community guidelines. And it will say things like, take criticism constructively, try to be kind to each other, those sort of aspirational goals of community members. And then the second section is things like, don't make comments about, these particular protected classes. So, don't discriminate based on like age, gender, sex, etc. And I think that with code of conduct committees, what happens, especially to new ones, is that they get the most extreme ones, like the harassment, the discrimination kinds of things. And then they also get reports about patterns of behavior where the community guidelines, those aspirational goals, are not met. And maybe it's because a community member is not communicating well, or there's some past issues that are bubbling up between 2 community members. And so I've seen both, where there are communication or collaboration issues that fall under like the community guidelines section, and then also the more discrimination or harassment guidelines. But in general, a code of conduct community's goal is to make sure that people feel welcome, safe in their community. And so if there's something that makes you feel unwelcome or unsafe, then you should report it to the Code of Conduct Committee, even if it's small, even if you think it's small or it may not be a code of conduct issue. I really encourage everyone to do that because we're here to listen.
I'm just going to plus one Sage on that, in that if we don't know, if those of us that are on a Code of Conduct Committee aren't getting reports of anything, or we don't hear of anything where people are feeling uncomfortable, we have no way to learn from that either, right? And that doesn't mean that we need to use somebody's bad experience as a learning experience for us, but we do just inherently, because that's the only chance we have to go through the process and make sure that it's working correctly and make sure that people are feeling safe and protected in this space.
Okay. Yeah, so sorry, just to follow on, just to explain, so the code of conduct that we have for LLVM isn't monitoring everything and looking for these types of situations. We're waiting for other people to report them. So it really, we do need that type of feedback. And again, to kind of echo that, and what Guy was saying, the sooner, if there is a problem, if somebody has said something, the sooner you report it, the better. Don't just let it sit and build up, just, because then I think the sooner it's reported and addressed and dealt with, the easier it is for everybody. And again, that goes back to the transparency reports where we can, we can all see that and learn from that.
The other thing I'll just throw in there too, we talk a lot on the committee internally, but we probably need to say it publicly more, which is if you have questions, it's not just about reporting problems, right? It's also if you have questions or you would like guidance on something, that is also what the committee is there for. And we would love that. We would love people to ask questions and say, I'm stuck in a situation or I'm not quite sure how to approach something. How could I handle this? I mean, we would love to be involved there. So please ask.
Okay, we have an audience question. Please feel free.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm really excited, loved hearing that discussion. I'm a little bit, I don't want to interrupt it, but I find that a really unique opportunity for me to ask the question. I heard quite often that if you get a report and there's kind of a violation, there will be some training for the person who might have violated the code of conduct. And I'm wondering a little bit do you have experience with actually kind of proactively training parts of a community where people say, okay, I'd like to practice code of conduct. I'm not deliberately breaking it, but maybe there's kind of an opportunity to connect with the community and learn some skills that may be useful in the future. Does that happen? Is that something people do?
I'll let Kate go first.
So absolutely, I spend a fair amount of time doing sort of outreachy things about how to be a nice person to other people. And I wanted to, something snicked on me about the word violation, because not everything is a violation of the code of conduct. Like sometimes a person is just behaving in a way that's natural for them, but that makes others feel less welcome and less included. And for example, if you're at a conference and there's a bunch of cables across the floor and you use a mobility aid and those cables mean that you can't get to one end of the hallway, nobody necessarily violated anything, but you can't get to that end of the hallway, right? And if you're at a conference and one of the speakers has sexualized imagery on their slides, you may feel you can't be in that session, and you may actually be hurt by that, and by the way you think other people are now looking at you. So anything that makes you feel unwelcome is not supporting the code of conduct. We don't need to work about whether or not it's violations. The code of conduct is a positive statement about what you should do to make everybody belong. Whether you deliberately went, I'm going to make sure that people in category X know they don't belong in our community, or whether you're just blithely, stomping around in big boots and leaving cables behind that keep people from getting from another end of the hallway, that's what we need to fix. We need to make it so everyone can get to all the hallways.
Sage?
Yeah, I'll echo what Kate said and sort of reframe it as, so there is impact, someone's behavior, action, or even inaction. So a policy or a lack of a policy can have a negative impact on someone. And a code of conduct committee is really there to stop that negative impact. Sometimes that means changing behavior. Sometimes that means changing policies, like making sure that there's always tape down over cables, that kind of thing. And I think I was trying to hear the question, so I'm going to repeat it so I can make sure that I can reiterate it. It sounded like the question was, has there been a way for people in the community to get together to practice the code of conduct and maybe practice skills being more inclusive? Was that the question?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. I do really recommend that. Maybe it means forming a reading group and reading a book like Nonviolent Communication book, or the Revolution Starts at Home, or an anti-racism book together and commenting and talking about it. Maybe it means bringing in outside speakers or outside trainers who can do training like disability rights or how to make the conferences more accessible to people. It can take many different forms. And I would also really encourage people, especially if they're leaders in a community, to talk either on your community chat or on social media about what you've learned, because I think it helps others recognize you're trying to change. And also it encourages newcomers to be like, oh, okay, they're taking some steps, they're actually trying and putting some energy into this. And then maybe people will see your community as, hey, yeah, I might actually want to join that, or even reach out to you. So I really encourage that.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so I was going to answer from the LLVM community perspective and I guess the foundation. As far as I know, we don't have anything organized like what you'd said, but I think it's a great idea. And I think it's something that we should certainly consider. It would take us kind of more from a reactive state to a proactive state, and I think it's an excellent idea. And if there's materials that are available that could help facilitate some of that, I think it's something that we should really, really look into and explore.
Guy?
The first thing I do when I get a new set of volunteers at a conference is deliver a little bit of code of conduct training. It's quite speedy, but it ends with, not with role play, but with some actual examples of situations I've come across in the past 5 years. And that is very helpful because it starts a conversation off. It's very easy to think that a lot of this is cut and dried. There are good people and bad people at conferences. And that is just so not the case. Yeah. There's a real danger of a loss of nuance when considering code of conduct. So I do recommend, read the transparency reports that get published. A lot of them do get published. Read them, turn them into role plays and say, well, how would you have handled this? Or how can we change this report in a way to get a different desired outcome? Rather than having somebody, saying unkind things, having somebody, pushing somebody around or something like that. Look at the transparency reports and consider how you would have responded. What would have had to have changed for you to respond in a different way?
Cool, thank you.
Kate first.
I helped run CPP North, which is in Toronto, C++ conference. And Sage mentioned changing policies. There are several CPP North policies that have arisen from code of conduct complaints at other conferences. This was our first year, where I'm like, I don't think that conference handled it right. Here's what we're going to do before we have the incident. We're going to have a policy that will prevent that from being a problem. And reading other people's transparency reports, learning from other people's mistakes, what more could you want?
Sage?
Yeah, and I just want to echo what Guy was saying about training. So with Otter Tech, I run code of conduct enforcement workshops once a month. And so those are great ways to get that practice, as he was saying, of taking a code of conduct report in, deciding how to handle it, and then following up with the person. And one of the great things about that training is that it is cross-community. So anyone can sign up for the class, and there's a lot of good cross-pollination between the two. So if you're thinking about, hey, we're getting some new volunteers, or our communities want to learn, then either attending one of those workshops or even talking with other code of conduct committee members from other communities and having that cross-pollination can really, really help.
Guy? Oh, Guy.
This is more of an aside to what Kate was saying about building a code of conduct policy, by looking at what other people have done. The effect of that was that CPP North was the first conference where I've been on the code of conduct team, which had no reports whatsoever. For me, that was a significant milestone because we've been putting codes of conduct in C++ conferences for some years now, and it does seem like the community as a whole is getting the hang of it. Now, another reading of that data point might be that people felt there was no point in responding. So I'm going to assume that wasn't the case, but I would encourage in your delegate feedback forms to ensure that they thought that the code of conduct was a meaningful thing and that nothing happened to them that they thought was not worth reporting. But as I say, I'm quite the optimist, and I think C++ North has shown how great things can be.
Sage?
What I've seen in some communities that I've definitely seen over time that the number of severe reports goes down the longer a community is going. But instead, once you get a code of conduct committee that people trust, what you see is the more long-standing patterns of inappropriate behavior, and also as your community becomes more diverse, you see some of those diverse backgrounds start to clash. And so you might see a report come in where you're like, both of these people are from marginalized groups, both of them have different needs, and it becomes more of how do we make sure both of their needs are met rather than like who needs to have consequences. It's more about navigating the space that as you become more inclusive, the types of your code of conduct reports are going to change.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And something about LLVM that I just thought of is like we have consistent transparency reporting on discourse, and I think that kind of serves as a possible way to see what's going on in our community and like revisit topics and see if we can kind of integrate more like preventative actions if we see issues like at each 3 months that transparency reports come out. And so a theme that I've been kind of picking up is that code of conduct enforcement teams is a lot about prevention and de-escalation when reports come up. Yeah. And my question related to that is, what do you do if someone declines to follow a code of conduct ruling, won't leave if you ask them to, insists that they did nothing wrong, or rejects any counseling or teaching that was offered? Guy?
Yeah, well, this is the $64,000 question, isn't it? I've stuck my hand up, not because I have an answer, but because so far that situation hasn't arisen. And I would hope that if that situation were to arise, I'd be able to escort the person off the premises. Because if somebody simply will not acknowledge the code of conduct and the team, there really is no place for them in that community. They're not going to, they just shouldn't be there. If they've signed up and they say, well, I don't care, I'm here for the C++, then there's no place for them there. Now, escorting people off premises is a really hard thing to do. It does require, I'm 6'4", I'm male, I'm actually quite large. And I've over my life, I've had other roles where I've had to escort people off premises. It is not an easy thing to do, and local laws might actually affect how you get people off premises. You might not be able to lay a finger on them, and it might just simply be a case of shouting them until they leave. It's a really hard question, and I hope that the nature of our community is such that it will never arise. And I know that sounds like a cop-out answer, but I am optimistic that this is not a situation you should ever have to encounter. But if any of you do have experience, to the contrary, I'd be delighted to hear it.
Kate?
I'm not sure delighted's the right word. I told a conference organizers whose code of conduct I was enforcing that they were breaking their own code of conduct and should do the following things about it. And they said, thank you very much. And to this day, I've not done those things. That was unfortunate. I told someone that their humor, which was both sexual and violent, was upsetting a bunch of attendees. And they basically said, F them if they can't take a joke. And I'm not in charge of whether or not that person can speak at that conference, so I don't know what came of that. There will be some people that feel you can't make them do things, and they may be right, but I have decided that I'm not going to let them steer my course. I'm going to keep doing what's right. It is very frustrating, though, when people say, I'm good. No, I don't need to apologize or leave.
Sage? Did you have your hand up?
Yeah. Just to add on to that, I've also had the experience of someone who was sexually harassing people at a conference, really not understanding why that was inappropriate. And in that particular case, what we did have to do is have venue security help us with that situation. So if you have, so know, as Guy said, know your local trespassing laws. If you are in a public venue, such as like a school or a university, they may have different laws than a private venue. Additionally, it's really good also to think about what would we do if someone who was a leader or like a high-level volunteer in our community did not follow the code of conduct? And especially if they're in an online space where like maybe they run the issue tracker, maybe they have access to your GitHub, maybe they have access to all of the logs on your chat server. So it's important to think about, as your code of conduct committee, I don't want to catastrophize, but have what I call an offboarding plan. Here's how we offboard a volunteer. Here's all the access rights that they may have. And that can also apply just to people who are leaving the project too. So having that list will help you, in those cases where someone's like, hey, I don't have time to be a volunteer, or I've got some family emergency, I'm gonna have to step back for a year. Having that list is gonna help you anyway. So I really encourage people to have those lists.
Thank you, Sage. We have some audience questions. I'll try to prioritize. Feel free to take over the mic.
So one thing that we've seen in the LLVM community that can be really difficult is people who are part of the community because they work for somebody who is paying them to work on the compiler. And this can be very challenging when they may actually not want to have anything to do with the community. They may not value the cultural norms. They may not, it's just their job, in air quotes, right? And yet they do have to engage. And so there's a challenge where if you have somebody who's not interested in participating and abiding by the code of conduct, for example, it can be very difficult and it becomes a problem for them in their employment too. I wonder if you've encountered any situations like that and have advice on how to handle this?
Sage?
Yeah. The showstopper question.
So let me repeat the question, make sure I heard it right. The question was, there are people within a community who they may be doing this just for their job, and so they're not necessarily tied to the community's values or goals, and so they may not want to follow the code of conduct. They may see it as just like, this is my job, I participate. It is always difficult when there is someone who is, their career is defined around working in the community. Yeah. However, there have been high-level instances, like at least things that I've noticed that are very, tend to go around social media, where someone is employed to work on something and the community is fearful to take action because of that. And what I will say is those incidents have a really chilling effect on community participation, especially by people from marginalized groups. And so I highly encourage code of conduct committees to not be afraid to take those actions if someone's employment is tied to this, because even if the person is not like directly valuing, they didn't get involved in the community as a volunteer, they are still there in the community in a professional role. And as such, they need to act professional to the level that the code of conduct defines, because they've agreed to that as a community member. And so even if someone doesn't necessarily value your goals, or if they say, oh, my employer's not going to care if you report me, your community still has that obligation to continue to create a safe and inclusive space. And so, yes, it may mean removing someone who's has their career built around a particular community. But I would hope that if you explained, hey, this is the standard for our community. If you cannot agree to this standard, we may have to take additional steps, including removing you from the community. I would hope someone would understand that.
Yeah, I think
Now, what I suspect would happen is the person's just going to get sneakier about hiding that behavior.
we've actually had a similar situation very early in our process where somebody self-removed themselves because they disagree with the concept of code of conducts and things like this. And so I think that, I mean, as your advice is very good. Thank you.
We have another audience question and then I think we'll wrap up after.
Yeah, it's just sort of kind of both of the previous 2 points. I think one of the most important things in having a code of conduct is actually making sure that project leadership is really behind you. That's a huge part of how you successfully enforce a code of conduct, is you make sure not only is project leadership really behind you, but that people know that, and that means that what you're doing, it has force, right? And people then immediately, even if you never actually exercise that force, and you usually don't want to, right? But when there is kind of that threat behind it, that yes, we can kick you out of this conference. Yes, we can revoke your commit access. Yes, we can kick you off these forums, right? Even if you don't ever need to do that, having that there, is vital. And it's vital in part because it's a communication to everybody else that, the project leadership through the code of conduct enforcement has your back and is going to try to stop, that kind of harassment and misbehavior. The other thing that a lot of this has been kind of direct, about conference setups, and as a forums moderator, I find that we actually have a lot of, flexibility. On the one hand, we have this danger that because we're just an online space, people can, if they want to troll us, they can, we take action against one account and they come back on another one and so on. And fortunately, the forums that I moderate have been, we haven't had too much problem with that sort of thing. But on the more positive side, with about Chris's question, with enforcement against people who this is part of their job, this is part of their career, you the flexibility you get from an online space where you can just take sort of temporary suspensions and things like that as sort of a very strong clue of look, we don't want to take this away from you forever. We know this is super important. You have to communicate these things, but having that sort of in your back pocket as a, look, we take this seriously. You don't seem to be taking this seriously. We're going to shut down your access for a week, and you should think about the fact that we might just take it away for the rest of your life, right? And if that changes your career, that's on you, right? To me, that's always been, an important part of how you actually make these things work.
Thank you, John. On that note, I do want to be cognizant of our panelists' times, and we are approaching the end. So I'd like to thank you all for being able to attend and share your learnings and teachings from time, kind of helping guide your community through the Code of Conduct, and also the lot in-person panelists as well. And thank you all.